Hi everyone, welcome to our second week of class. Hopefully last week went well for you. And also I'm going to be making a video similar to last week where I walk you through the assignments. I feel like that helped everyone. So watch out for that video as well. So today we're talking about inclusion and law. So we touched on inclusion last week. Let me scroll through here. So first of all, think to yourselves, if we were in class, we would actually talk about this, but what do you remember about the concepts of inclusion? What is it? What are the components? What does that look like in a classroom? So kind of just bring those thoughts back right now. Also, remember how important person first language is. So remember, we always put the person first and then the disability. So uh, a person with disability, it's not uh, this person is a disability and so forth. So keep that in mind because you will need that throughout all of your lessons, all of your WKU career and your educational career in the future. So just wanted to bring up those two components real quick. And this is the last little piece of review I wanted to remind us of. All students are general ed students first. So if you've already watched the other assignment help, you'll understand what I'm talking about. But when you teach students with disabilities and students without disabilities in the same classroom, you treat everyone as your student. They're all your students, and it's not his class. That's her student, not mine. We don't want to be that way. If they're all in our room and it's a co-teaching situation, they're all of our students. So just wanted to reiterate that for this week. So we're going to get into the law and a little bit of the history. So your reading assignment this week, which I'll go over in the other video, is dealing with the portion of mostly the 1960s and previous to that time. So the textbook covers a great amount of information here. It does start at the time where students with disabilities were more recognized in educational society, but I did want you to know how that had evolved from hundreds of years of history. So I think you'll find that assignment fascinating. I hope you do, and I hope it's beneficial to you. But for this lecture, we're going to start from the 1960s and talking about seclusion to mainstreaming. So as you'll see when you do your reading this week, you'll notice that previously in a lot of the 1960s, it was completely separated. Most programs were, students with disabilities were kept in an institution of sorts, and then students without disabilities were in a typical school setting. It was completely separated, and you'll know why after you read the article assigned to you as well and where the thought process came from. When we look at the 1960s, they started realizing, wow, this is not effective. We have all of these students who are with disabilities, but they're just in their own institution, separated, and it's not benefiting them. It's not helping them with any type of their education. It's a stigma on them as well. So finally, people started pushing it into a mainstreamed society. And you'll see the difference in a couple slides of what's mainstreaming versus inclusion. It is different. So what they did here, they had students with mild disabilities who entered the school system, and they most likely were included in the classroom, but they may not have ever really interacted with the other kids, or maybe they sat at a separate table in the back and no one ever really worked with them and the general ed students and then really didn't mix very much. It was still very secluded, but within the general classroom population and the setting. So mild disabilities entered into the school system. Those with significant disabilities were still institutionalized and they were still separated. So at this point, that's what leads us next to our next point. 1970s. This is where it gets real. So there was a reporter by the name of Geraldo Rivera, who you will also see in your textbook. He was a fairly new reporter, and he decided to sneak into the Willowbrook State School. And I mean, pretty risky, but he's a reporter and he wanted to see what was going on in there. 6,000, if you can imagine, 6,000 people were in this facility. And I can't give you the square footage of the place, but as you can tell by these pictures, I don't think the square footage was, relative to 6,000 people living there. You can see even, I mean, these pictures are heartbreaking. I hate to put them up here, but this is reality. This is what it is. They were treated poorly. There was abuse. You can see their living environments in here. It was horrific. And so when he found this out and they busted the place in New York, they people started filing lawsuits on them. The place shut down, and that was the end of that. But they, at that point, they made a push towards deinstitutionalizing things, which just means getting people out of these institutions and getting more into that normalization. And the normalization just means, we want the people with disabilities in our classrooms doing the same things everybody else is doing and getting an appropriate education. So it's moving to that mainstreaming even more for students with severe disabilities. Whereas before, that wasn't the case. You'll see in your textbook really sad things. I mean, people were saying that they were just disgusting to look at. They were bothering them, even having them in their presence. I mean, these are human beings, and disability or no disability, they're people. And that's what we have to keep in our minds at the end of the day, even when we teach, no matter what level of disability, whether regular ed, no matter how intense the behavior is and how aggravating people can become to us, people are still people, and we want to bring as much hope and just light and joy and help people move to where they need to go and not treat people like this. This is terrible. So as you can see, we made it through, we moved towards normalization for students with severe disabilities. In the 1980s, they had a push for regular education initiative. It's called REI. And what they wanted with this is saying, okay, great. There are students that are being mainstreamed into the classrooms, meaning students with disabilities are now in our general education classrooms, but the students are in the back table working by themselves. And that's just not working because they're still not getting a good education. They're still not learning in the way that they need to. And it's only the special education teachers who are doing everything. Those are their kids only. The general ed teacher never interacts with them, and that's just how it is. So this REI, this initiative, is moving things away from that. And they're saying, hey, first of all, we need more improved strategies within the field of special education. We need to figure out how to teach our students in the best way possible. And they said, look, what's happening now is that students with disabilities are being functionally excluded. And that just means, like I said before, they have their own table. They're not working with anybody else. They could possibly not even be working on anything or learning. They're just in the class to say that they're in the class. And think about that, because honestly, this is not very different from what we see a lot of times today. We see a lot of times that general education teachers, or it could be if they don't have a co-teacher with them, it's sometimes easier to say, okay, you sit at this table, here's some low-level activity for you to work on. And I know we have to base things on student level. So please hear me when I say we give our students age-appropriate and good work, but we also keep the bar high, because I've seen teachers in my career hand a student with disabilities, let's say autism, for example, handing a student with autism a coloring sheet, and they are in middle school or high school. And that's insulting. And that's what I mean by making sure it's age appropriate, and not just giving the students with disabilities saying, okay, I can't handle all of this right now. I have a whole class who needs to learn. I'm going to put this student with autism at this other table and give them this coloring sheet. And I mean, that's just one example. Instead, they're saying, look, we need better teaching strategies. We need to prepare teachers to know how to work with students with disabilities. And we need to not separate them within the classroom, but find a way to create true inclusion. Whereas we're all working together, we generalize accommodations and strategies, and we work towards bettering the situation. So full inclusion is the extreme that it swung to. So you can see that, let's say over here, no special ed students at all in the school. Then they said, okay, we got to fix that. Swing over here. All special education students need to be in the general ed classroom. It doesn't matter the severity of a disability, it doesn't matter if it really fits them or not. We're placing everyone in there because we made the mistake on this side. So here's the thing, the textbook even alludes to this, and I would like to say this as being true as well. Things have really moved a little bit more towards the middle right now. If you're thinking of a pendulum, we swung over here and now it's settling in the middle. The reason is, like we talked about last week, inclusion is not always the best thing for every student. I would say as much as possible, if a student with disabilities is able to come into the general ed classroom and learn the materials and get some great social interaction, always include them. That's just a rule of thumb. But I've had students, for example, who have a specific learning disability, and that's SLD. That's a type of a disability, SLD. And this student had a specific learning disability in math. So let's say I was a high school teacher, which I was a co-teacher with another teacher who had a full class. So I could put in the student's IEP that the student with a learning disability in math needs to go into regular algebra, but that's really just not realistic because that is the actual main issue. So probably what I would do as a special ed teacher is place that student in general ed inclusive classes the whole entire day except maybe 1 hour during math class. And I would probably assign them to a resource math class to make sure that they have individualized attention with one teacher with about 8. Usually the cap on a resource class is 10, but generally we try and keep it 8 and below. So that just means they get more attention, they're getting more direct instruction, they're getting more feedback on practice. And for that student, that is the best situation. And when you look at this part right here where it says full inclusion, it wouldn't matter if that was the best thing for that student to have a resource math class. We would say, doesn't matter, we're putting them in full inclusion anyway. So hopefully that makes sense. We're swinging back to the middle, and personally, from Dr. Jones' opinion, I think that's a good option.